Hello everyone, welcome back to the Federal Focus. And to start this video off, I have a question. Why do you think that the 2024 election map looked like this? And what I mean by this, I mean why are certain states red or blue? There's no really um it doesn't show you why on this map. It just shows you how it happened. And so you could have been watching this and you know that certain states are red or blue, but you really don't know why. And this is a tough question to answer. But in this video, I will be trying to give 3 reasons why I think certain states vote red or blue. My 3 reasons is going to be education. Second reason is going to be population density. The third reason will just because of the Civil War and the lasting impact of slavery. Um, so the third one, it's not exactly because of that. It's mostly why the South votes overwhelmingly um Republican. It'll also be talking about the shifts in the 1960s with the Republican Party. But first, I just want to show a demographic map here. Well, it's not really a map, but it shows you. Um, First, I'm just gonna be talking about the education. Okay, so if we can find this, as you can see, if I just press the space button for no reason, um, you can see here the more education or the quote unquote more education you have, the more Democratic you vote. And I mean Democrat. I don't know why I always say Democratic. It's not the party name, it's the Democrats. Okay. Um, as you can see, 15% of people somehow did not graduate high school. They're probably a little bit older, which could explain why they're more Republican, but not really why. But as you can see, they vote more Republican. But as you go to kind of higher degrees, um, sort of like a postgraduate degree, they vote very Democratic. And this correlates to this because as you can see, states like California, Illinois, New York, and Massachusetts, those are the 4 states with the most top 500 universities. And you can imagine that would make a shift because it means that people would go to college more, they go to more prestigious colleges, and because of that, they would tend to vote more with the Democrats, just because that's how the demographic works. Demographics are destiny. Demographics control the whole country. They are very important. Okay, so you have to keep them in mind for this whole video, and really when you're looking at politics in general. Okay. Um, you could also wonder why states like Texas, Florida have a lot of them. We'll have a couple of them, but they're not very um democratic. Democrats. Um, that's because of stronger shifts because of other things which happen, which I'll talk about later. Um, Education though is a major shift and drive on how you vote. It also is a major shift because, as you can see here from the last election, this is actually a big shift. It used to be that wealthier people used to vote more the Democrats, more the Republicans. Like if you just go back to the big money politics, you can think with the first election with super PACs, Mitt Romney had a lot of money from there. Trump has even more, but he is actually winning more with the people who are earning less, as you can see here. Now, under 30,000, they still vote mostly with the Democrats, but people in the middle class voted more for Trump and the Republicans. And as you can see from here, they shifted 20 points towards them. Um, and the richer people, tended to vote more with the Democrats, um, is very, which is very important here because more educated people tend to make more money, and because they made more money, they voted more for the Democrats because everyone else did. Um, so that's the first reason I have there on why some of these blue states here voted for the Democrats. Um, there's also a thing where states usually on the coast usually have more cities, which could help. Which cities usually have more colleges and universities, which would in turn also produce a more favorable result for the Democrats. I'm using fancy words right there. Um, but my second reason why is population. Sorry about that. My alarm just went off to make the video, which I'm making right now. I thought it was at 8, so I wouldn't have to worry about it. 7:30. I apologize. Um, Anyways, population density is the second reason I have here. Um, and as you can see by this map here, the darker blue are less densely populated. This map's very low quality for some reason. So I'm gonna do this. Um, you kind of see your places like California, New York, Massachusetts, where I live. It's really densely populated, right there. But other places, Michigan, Minnesota. Keep in mind, you could have 90% of the counties be a very dark blue, and have that one county which is very light, and that's the major city and where everyone is, so it wouldn't really matter to you about the other counties. But um, this is important here because you guys can see that's the wrong map, anyways. You can see here, okay, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, Nebraska, Kansas, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana. All of these states voted Republican, and that's because they're more densely populated, and because they are more densely populated, they have more farms. And as you can imagine, farmers vote very heavily towards the Republicans. I can also maybe find that here. Your rural, 64 points towards the Republicans. This wasn't always the way. You go back to someone like William Jennings Bryan in 1896. I know I'm going kind of far back here. It's just in my brain right now. Um, but he won the farmer vote because of his policies, and I believe that's because mostly the Democrat Party really abandoned the farmers. They're really mostly with in the cities now. It doesn't really matter about 90% of the county, 90% of the state. I'm sorry, in a place like I'm trying to think of somewhere. Okay, somewhere. It doesn't really matter because if it's all farms, but there's the one huge city that's where all the people are. Doesn't matter how the rest of the state works. Density is also very important. Along with the demographics. Um, Also, farmers turn to earn less just because it's more difficult work, just make less money, even though they're very, very important. They're basically the most important people in the country because they make all the damn food. Um, they would vote more for the Republicans. They would be somewhere in the 30,000 to 49,000 or 50,000 to 99,000, probably this range, or the very low end of this range, but they tend to vote more Republican for that, which is why a lot of these Great Plains states here vote Republican. Now, places like Kentucky and New Hampshire, they have the same amount of electoral votes as here, but they're very small, so they're not they're not you're not spread out. They're very densely populated. They're just really small, which is why they have so low electoral counts. Which in turn makes them have a lot of cities, and as I was talking about earlier, having more cities makes you more favorable to the Democrats. Places like Utah, Nevada, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, um, the Great Plains. Oh, and Alaska, the most densely populated state. The most not densely populated state. They all have a lot of farms, not many cities. They're very low populated areas, and that's really why they tend to vote Republican. Um, and the third reason why, the third reason why is because of this. The third. Okay, that's all that's gonna be cut out. Okay, the third reason why I have certain demographics, certain areas tend to vote this way is because of the Civil War and the 1960s movement. As you can see in the South, Georgia, North Carolina, kind of the outliers here. They have a lot of cities though, so it makes sense. Places like Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Florida. Those are all part of the South. Um, and this is a side note. Did you know that Maryland's technically considered part of the South? They were a border state in the Civil War. I don't. They're not. They're very far to the north. They shouldn't be considered part of the South. Um, like, would you consider part? Would you consider Ohio southern? Because it has places which are more southern than Maryland. It makes no sense. Um, but I'm just gonna have a history lesson right here. So in the 1860s, the South obviously was the only place with slavery. Um, the North used to have it, but then they didn't have it anymore because they abolished it. So after the Civil War, a lot of these places, well, basically every single place starting after Reconstruction, which was the period where they tried to reform, or where they tried to rebuild the country, didn't work out completely, which left you in the South. Basically, all black voters were disenfranchised, and because of that, it voted very heavily. And when I mean heavily, I mean 98% sometimes in 1932 with FDR in the state of South Carolina, voted heavily for Democrats. and that continued basically until 1964. And in 1964, something shifted. LBJ was the president because Kennedy got assassinated. Democrats were starting to lean more. Black voters were starting to lean more to the Democratic Party, starting with FDR in the first place because the New Deal programs were helping them a lot more. Um, and that kind of continued until 1964, where I will pull up the map for the election. Um, as you can see, South, Deep South, heavily Republican, and that's because the Goldwater was kind of playing into the fears of the white voters in the South there, about LBJ being very favorable to civil rights, which he was. Okay, and that kind of started the shift here, where you can see all of the South becoming Republican because the Republican Party has shifted and the Democratic Party has shifted. It's not a party switch. I always see people refer to that. It's just a party change. Okay, they're still the same party. They just have different views because it's been 160 years. Of course, they're going to change. Um, Also, you can see with the black population by state, um, people with more African states with more African Americans just tend to vote more Democratic. Texas is one of the outliers, and so is Florida. But that's because a lot of the minority voters where they have there, like Florida, they have a lot of Cubans, which tend to vote more Republican because they were in Cuba, which was communist, and so they come back, and the Republican Party is more anti-communist. Kind of the same with Texas sometimes, but Texas is just a weird state in general. I like Texas; it's just weird. Okay, but that's just gonna be all for today. Those were the three reasons why certain states vote this way. We covered basically most of the country here, besides some places, um, like the Midwest, but the Midwest in general, you could just chop that up to the Rust Belt. But thank you guys for watching. Um, Video on Sunday, another one that will be the 7th episode, I believe, and goodbye.